Now, just curious of the audience here, who here, please raise your hand if you are not in your 20s. Anyone here who are not in your 20s, raise your hand. Okay, pretty much everyone. So that is why I'm not going to tell you how to run a company. I'm going to be talking to you about millennials. Now, millennials are the majority of the workforce, and they are the most difficult to engage, retain, and manage. Gallup Research recently came out with a worldwide study finding that 63% of employees in the workplace are not engaged. And that's what I want to talk to you about. How do you attract, manage, and retain the millennial workforce? Audience participation part number 2. How many of you have done any research or heard another speaker or maybe read an article on LinkedIn about millennials in some regard? How many of you have actually done this? Yeah, pretty much everyone to some degree. And you know what's fascinating about that? The vast majority of people who talk about millennials and write about millennials are not millennials. That's like going to a foreign country and talking to people who have read about it, but no one who's actually been there. And so being from millennial land, my goal today is to give you insights that you might not be able to read about that are a little bit more in tune with the millennial mind. The way I got started speaking about millennials was quite modest. It was actually at Stanford University, where I was in a computer science camp in a dorm, puking on the floor. Now, I was not intoxicated. In fact, I was 8 years old. I was homesick because 2 software entrepreneurs sent me there. They were called Mom and Dad. Fortunately, that wasn't too traumatic to what I continued studying computer science, and I went to UC Berkeley where I studied computer science. From there, I worked in 5 different startups, worked in Nokia when they were cool, and last but not least, I founded my own tech company. Now from there, after my tech company, I started getting into speaking, which I really like doing. And after one of my talks, a principal engineer comes up to me and says, "Hey Jeff, can you come into our company and talk about millennials to our executive team?" And I said, "Sure. How hard could it be? I'm a millennial, that's pretty easy to do. I'll talk about myself." But after doing a little bit of research, right, because I didn't just want to wing it, I wanted to be a little prepared, I read entitlement, lazy, disengaged, and I was like, oh, this doesn't really seem like what I was thinking. And then I went on the flip side to the values. What were the values of the millennial generation versus current generations? And they were quite similar, identical, just 1 or 2 more differences. So I started going back in history, generation after generation. And I found out going hundreds and hundreds of years, the first person to ever complain about a generation difference was actually Socrates, written by Plato. So the whole, one generation and another generation dynamic of polarization is quite old news. But it's good to identify it in one of these talks because very often people get caught up on that, thinking this is the first time it's ever happened. But it's been continuous throughout history. But how do you understand millennials? Who are they? What do they like to do? Well, the 2 ways I like seeing millennials are in 2 different ways. The first one is the environment, the one that they grew up in. Statistically, you look at their home environment, 1/3 of millennials, 18 to 24, live at home with their parents. In fact, about 1 in 5 people in HR actually have a parent get involved with the job interview process. So it's pretty significant on that. The next thing is that millennials, and I'm talking about, there's a millennial ages from 1981 to born in 2000. That's a pretty wide range. That's like 17 to 34. I'm talking more the millennial group from 21 to 29, okay? That group has never seen a financial crisis, which means that they're going to be a lot more risk-taking and willing to make decisions in their life that people of older generations would be like, that is crazy. So that's the environment that they live in. Now, break it down with technology. With all the different technology changes, how does that affect millennials? Well, first and foremost, what I've actually gave a talk about on TED is the conditioning process that takes place. From the neuroassociations and the dopamine that's produced, technology becomes addictive. And over time, people start to expect things all the time. And eventually, they're expecting everything to come in life like an Amazon Prime delivery. You can't order your career on Amazon Prime. So having that conditioning process, you then go into a transparency effect. What's fascinating about technology is that it makes us become more of who we are. Very often, millennials are seen as very narcissistic. You look at social media, you look at Facebook, and you see all these pictures of themselves. You're like, wow, they're full of themselves. But it's always been there through all this time. In fact, the number one group for putting up Instagram photos are actually 35 to 45-year-old women, which is fascinating to me. I didn't know that was even possible. So you have the transparency effect, and last but not least, one of my favorites is the time it actually takes us to mature. It slows down. The decisions that we make are a little bit different. And so the way you can think about it, like how a millennial thinks, is if you had a contract that you could not get married or have a house until you were 30, what decisions would you make in your life? If you probably would travel a little bit more. You might not be as loyal to your employer because you didn't need something so stable. You might join a smaller company and be a little bit more risk-taking. That's the environment that millennials live in. And statistically, they get married older and older and older now, and there's a sort of a transitionary period in their life that's never been there before. So this is the first time we've ever been able to see this. So that's the environmental side and the technology side mixed into a concoction of what you have of millennials today. Now, before I dive into the tactical, how to attract, manage, retain millennials, there's one other thing that I wanted to go over that I hear a lot of keynotes, a lot of talks, but I don't hear people talk about this even though statistics are very common in talks. Understanding the difference between statistics and stereotypes. What do I mean by this? Let's say we went on to Forbes, like we read all of our statistics, and saw that millennials are, hypothetical here, right? Hypothetical. 90% of millennials love Frappuccino at 9 a.m., okay? And you're like, great, I understand millennials now. You go into the workplace and you approach a millennial who's drinking hot chocolate. And you look at him and you say, why are you drinking Frappuccino? And they look back at you and you're like, what do you mean? I like hot chocolate. And then you said, well, I read on Forbes that you're supposed to be drinking Frappuccino. Now, what do you think they're gonna do? They're probably gonna blow it off or whatever, but they might go on LinkedIn or Glassdoor and write a review and say, oh, my boss is stereotyping me, right? Because that's what millennials do. They always go on social media and write stuff. Well, that's using a statistic for the individual. And that's not probably the best way you want to use it. A better way of using statistics is through the structure or the system of the company. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that if you take that statistic and say you had a new hire day where you brought a bunch of millennials in, you had this sort of dynamic interview process, 90% of the drinks you would order would be Frappuccino because of what you know. But now you're addressing a structure or a system versus an individual. And the only reason why I bring this up is I don't really mind if you take it the other way, but a lot of companies have taken this out of context. So you have companies like Google and Uber who are having PR trouble because they address the individual and not the actual system. So that is what I wanted to cover there before I get into more of the tactical stuff. Now let's go into how to attract. How do you get a millennial to really like the company that you're looking at and you work for? So there's three different phases to attraction that I have here. The first one's attention, grabbing their attention. Second is interest. Third is the commitment. So to start things off, attention. What does that necessarily mean? Let's say that they don't know about your company at all, and your job is to capture their attention. How do you do that effectively? You need to ask yourself a couple of questions starting off. The first one is, what is talent? Very often, especially talking to hiring managers, they're like, I want an A player who knows everything and got the top scores in his class. That's great. But if you look at the team, would an A player who's super independent ruin the team dynamic? What if you want a B player who's very warm, affable, who would just create a whole new synergy on the team? What you find out is there are different personality traits and people who are good at different things. And if you start to identify those, when you actually start trying to reach out to millennials and a different demographic, it's going to be a lot easier to get that particular candidate that you're looking for. But too often, people don't ask this first question, which is, what sort of person, in terms of their talent, will make the best impact to a particular team? So after you've got that unraveled, you're like, okay, I get talent. You need to start with why. Why would someone want to work here? Stephen Covey said in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And this is more the value proposition. When someone sits across from you from the table and they say, you know, why do you like working here? You would say, this reason. Now, very often when people say, oh, I'm going to figure out why people want to work here, they'll talk to their coworker and be like, you like to work here because we're transforming the industry, right? And they say, of course. But millennials don't really care that much. So what you want to do is you need to talk to that demographic in your company and be like, why do you want to work here? And you know what? Very often it's going to be way different than you originally thought. When I first graduated, I was looking for a job that paid more than a starting contract for Nike. So that was my first objective. And second was the brand reputation. So the first thing I just latched on was to high pay. But then after I went through that whole company, I realized, you know, I didn't really get behind what they were doing. I didn't really feel it emotionally. And so the next decision I made was, okay, I want to be behind the purpose. But as over time, through someone's career, the reason for working somewhere evolves. So a really good thing you can do is actually talk to people in your organization and sit them down and be like, look, why do you want to work here? Why do you like working here? It might be because it's close to a downtown. That's where they can watch movies and hang out with their friends. It might not be a reason you're really looking for, but once you grab that reason, it's going to be a great lead magnet and a way to pull millennials in to your company. Now that you have an idea of the value proposition, the next question is, where do you want to send this message? You now have a global talent pool. 30% of people now are working remotely, and it's projected by 2020, over 50% will be. So you have an interesting question here. Do you want to stay local, like the local colleges nearby, or do you want to start building remote teams across different countries? Every single startup that I was in, including my own that I founded, and the one that I'm currently in, has remote teams. Very common. But if it's a little bit too difficult with the culture and the productivity issues, then you could stay more local. But you have a different option here than you have ever before, which is phenomenal. So now that you can decide where do you want to send this message, now it's crafting the right message. And so what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be showing you a short video of a company that you all know, and it's a video that candidates watch before they start interviewing with this place. So let's take a look at this video.
Oh, hey Jen, how you doing?
Hey David, how are you?
Pretty good. What's up?
Oh, not much, but we're making a movie.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll leave you alone. I'll see you around.
See you at the Tech Talk.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Jen Fitzpatrick, and I'm an engineering.
How many of you cringed when you saw that? Like, you probably were like, how often is it when someone just randomly bumps into someone for a video, right? But here's the thing is you probably picked up on that, and it's like, that's not natural. That's weird, and that's Google's, by the way. That was a Google intro video, so it's a very well-respected company. So you say, well, it was well-produced, so the initial impression takes place in the first 30 seconds, right? So you're like, okay, that's one way of doing it. Feels a little bit awkward. I can't really relate. But here's another one. Does anyone here know Shopify, the e-commerce startup? Yeah, a couple of them. So this is their intro video.
The type of person we want to hire here at Shopify is someone who is resourceful. Someone who can draw the owl.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Have you seen that internet meme?
What meme?
Basically, it explains how to draw an owl in 2 steps. Step number 1 is to draw 2 circles. Step number 2 is to draw the rest of the owl. And that, in a nutshell, is the type of person we want.
That's right. I couldn't include swearing in this presentation, so I thought I would edit that out. Now, you got it though, right? You laughed, and the thing that you're probably laughing at is, I can relate to this guy. When I first saw that video, like I was just kind of testing out different videos, I was watching it and I'm like, there's no way I want to work for them when I first saw Tobias. I'm like, there's no way. And as soon as he swore, I'm like, I'm bought. Complete 180. Why? Because he's breaking that mold. He's a person outside of just the blazer and Jeff Butler, the speaker. He is Jeff Butler hanging out on coffee. Everyone swears, but he identified that, and that's how they uniquely sort of grabbed your attention. And this is sort of a thing that I see in companies now. It's called the humification of companies. And it's breaking from I you to I it. In Daniel Goleman's book, best-selling book, Social Intelligence, he goes into how people really crave the I you, relating to the individual past just a suit, past just a job title. And in the Shopify video, they capitalize on effectively because they're like, look, people want humor in their lives, people want to be able to relate to something, this is how we're going to do it. And when you break that mold in your messaging towards millennials, you completely separate yourself. And you know the best part? You don't need a budget. That Google video, they could spend so much money. You can literally shoot a simple video with someone being interviewed and it's natural and authentic. One of the things that a lot of companies that I see being a millennial, and I watch this, when they have the onboarding videos or the hey, work for here videos, is that there's a very canned interview. That all the questions are already rehearsed, everything's sort of cut out, there's B-roll, right? But if you look at the most popular YouTube videos out there, they're not like high production. They're literally like two people sitting down just hanging out. And that's what millennials are really craving, is that ability to relate to companies, the ability to feel like there's a place that I can trust and they have my back. This goes further just than the interview process. 62% of millennials say, hey, I will be loyal to your brand if I'm engaged on an individual level, breaking through the I it to the I you. So what I just covered here is that you have the type of talent, you figure out what you want on your team, craft your value proposition, combine it into a tailored message, and then you pick which channels are best to address. That's the attention phase. Now the interest phase, where I draw that line, is once they start the interview process. And the interview process usually falls into 3 different steps. You have your behavioral interviews, you have your technical interviews, and then last but not least, your on-site. They can all be combined as one, they can be a different order, but that's generally how things have followed in my over 500 interviews I've done in my career. So, on this, for technical side, I'm actually gonna not talk about the behavioral side that much. I'm gonna go more into the technical side because this is a technical audience. You have 3 different ways you can test a candidate. You have first is a actual test. You can go into HackerRank, or there's different things that you can fill out online that candidates would go through. Really good way of screening candidates. But here's the case with tests, is that that can test someone on how well they can look up answers online or how well they compare it with a buddy. Very often this is used as sort of a castaway for large companies because they're like, look, we already have so many candidates, let's weed this down a little bit more. So you can weed out some pretty qualified people in the process, but it's a good way to also funnel it. The next option that you have is projects. Now projects are highly, highly effective because you can actually have someone do something that's like an actual problem in the workplace. Here's a bug, go solve it. Here's our environment, pull it down from GitHub. But here's the drawback. If a millennial is not convinced or sold in your company just yet, and you introduce it too early, you know what happens? They never finish it. Because they haven't been sold on it. If it's 2 hours, 5 hours of their time, they're like, look, I'm just gonna go to the other company where there's a shorter interview process, and then they'll go hired there. So putting that, you have to be very strategic on where you place it. Last but not least is the standard technical interview. Pretty common, but it takes about 45 minutes of another employee's time. You also need to sit down with them saying, hey, let's see how you go through, what exactly are you testing? So each one has its pros and cons in there, and for each part of this interview process, you need to strategically put which one and where. The on-site interview process is probably one of the most stressful things that I think anyone here is probably going through. You dress all nice, you put your cologne on, you do your hair, you shave, you go into the workplace, and for millennials, it's a very stressful time because you're bombarded by all these people. One tactical thing that you can try that I think can work highly, highly effective, and I have seen this work very well, is that on the team that you're hiring for, grab the most affable, friendly person. Put them out in the front of the company and have them wait for the candidate. Once the candidate comes, they introduce themselves, hi, nice to meet you, welcome, they grab some water, they walk into the first interview, and they're sort of like the shadow buddy for the day. Why would you do that? Turns out that 58% of men and 47% of women won't trade higher pay for friends. You're trying to tap into the relationship right here. And plus, in the case that where you actually do want to give them a job offer, when they have people that they know, an employer that cares about them, they're more likely to go with that employer. It's a really tactical way of actually tapping into the relationship side of millennials. The next is commitment. You just gone through the whole interview process, you found your candidate, you're like, how can I get them on board? And some people here, like IBM, strong company, probably really easy because they have a strong brand. But some other companies that are smaller struggle with this. What sort of job offer is going to be enticing so they sign up? There's a couple things you need to take into consideration. Glassdoor says that 90% of millennials prefer benefits over a pay raise. Bentley University found that 77% of millennials say that telecommuting makes them more productive. And Society of Human Resources says that only 2% of employers are actually leveraging PTO right now. So the case that's super common is that you're an unknown company. Let's say Zito. Does anyone here know Zito Media? Zito Media, perfect. That's exactly why I picked them, because I don't know them either. I just read about this. Zito Media comes along and finds a great candidate, pulls them in, interviews them, and they're like, great, we want to hire you. Worst case scenario, bigger company comes along, tries to poach them by offering them 25% more pay. Zito Media closes them, basically pulls someone when they're offered 25% more pay simply because they said, you know what, we can't match that offer, but we can offer you unlimited PTO. Done. Person preferred more work-life balance. Fascinating though. So there are ways to combat, say, other companies come in with humongous offers. And so when you look at this, you have multiple things that you can throw in a millennial's direction. Work from home, unlimited PTO, access to decision makers for growth opportunities, training programs, right, to help them, pay for them to progress in their career. So it's not just okay, here there's just pay and there's benefits. You can get creative with it. And if you tap into you get into the millennial's mind and you figure out the right things, you can definitely separate yourself as a company and make that winning job offer. So I just covered the 3 things right here: attention, interest, and commitment, all the way through initially grabbing a millennial's attention to offering them a job offer and sign up for your company. Next thing I want to go into is management. We're a little bit low on time, so I might have to go a little faster on these things. Number one thing that I hear people complain about with millennials is them being unmotivated and lazy. Totally understandable. And some ways that, there's like 20 different ways of handling this, but one I'm going to throw at you today is with quantifying milestones and feedback, a more of a mid-level manager tactical thing to do. Why is this effective? Because 72% of millennials say they're more engaged when a manager quantifies their goals. If you really want to upset a millennial when they first get hired, they get really excited, they sit down with you, and they're like, I'm so ambitious, I want to be a senior engineer in 2 years. And you're like, great, it's going to take you 3 years. And you give them an actual year amount, not an actual tactical, what sort of steps you need to take as an individual. That's tough. Because for anybody, if you don't feel like you have in control of your future, you're going to lose motivation. So tapping into that is a very effective way to help out with millennials. In addition, it comes in the individual mid-level manager position. There's also companies out there that are taking 3-year promotion windows and dividing it into 6-month blocks, where literally people get small promotions here and there and keeps them sort of on that feedback loop that they're progressing. Small pay raise, slight title change, but it keeps them motivated along the process. The next thing is remote work. A lot of millennials are like, I love work-life balance, and they say, can I work from home? How do you do this effectively? Turns out that looking at Canadian stats, the millennial group that we're talking about, almost 80% of them say, hey, I want to work from home, and they have the resources. So how do you do this effectively? The first thing you need to realize is that many times a manager won't want to do this because they had hey, I wasn't able to, why should you? Just keep in mind that technology has changed, as many of you have known, and you now, for the first time in history, can work remotely, and especially for technology positions, completely. So there's 2 main concerns: productivity, culture. Maybe them slacking off a little bit. And the culture is, if they're outside of the office, maybe they won't be able to like the people as much, so then they'll sort of become, what's it called, apprehensive or just disengage and then leave. Those are the 2 biggest concerns. At the same time though, it can work very, very well in some extreme cases. Rebecca Greenfield got her dream job, just graduated from college. and she landed a job at Fast Company. Wonderful. But here's what's interesting. As an employer, you need to really think about this. Worst case scenario happened. Day one of her having the job, her mother goes into a coma. She has to fly across the country and visit her and realizes her mom doesn't have much time left. Contacts her employer and says, look, I just started here. Can I still continue working here? Now, as an employer, that's a difficult decision. You just hired this person. You have no way of knowing that they'll be reliable, especially in this stressful of a situation. But fortunately, the employer said, okay, you can work remotely. And she wrote, generously, my employer was very generous. None of that encroached on my much needed vacation days either. Where I found this, you know where I found this? I found this on Fast Company because she's a columnist and she writes for Fast Company. And she had this whole article about work-life balance and work from home. And in there was her whole story about her mother actually dying from cancer, but her employer was understanding and provided her with that. That is an excellent use of using remote work, and how, can you imagine like how loyal she is to that company now and understanding even if she leaves there, she would have so many good things to say about them. So remote work, it is needed sometimes because we all are people. We all have family problems, emergencies that we need to take care of. But fortunately, that remote work allows us to sort of address these emergencies and still continue with our current employer. Some of you may be like, great, that's a wonderful case, but what about teams that are completely remote? Anyone here know Envision? They're a prototyping company, so one or two of you. So Envision is a company that's very fascinating. 2017, best places to work for. On top of that, over 1 million customers, so they're not a brand new company, 16 different time zones, 100% remote. How are they doing this? Their CEO says a couple different things. Hire self-motivated employees, tight onboarding process. What he means by that is literally the first 3 weeks, hour for hour is mapped out. So as have my own remote team, I'm like, hey, let me try that out. So I had a contracting position, right? That had a constant turnover in there, and I literally had hour for hour then of the first week mapped out. You know what happened? 50% increase in retention for that position. Incredible, but very often people sort of drop off in that first period. The next thing that he did was, okay, optional sharing workplaces. When you have remote teams, you can open up little WeWork offices or next spaces that people can join and sort of work together once or twice a week. And last but not least, once a year get together, where everyone sort of comes together and actually is able to relate emotionally. It's like this large party thing. So those are 4 major things that he was doing in his company to make it so successful. Keep in mind, there are benefits to this. It can drive in productivity, but here's the thing, I underline can because not for everyone, so people get distracted. Drives employee efficiency, reduces turnover, as we saw earlier, but challenges is selective hiring. Not everyone's made for remote work. Some people are just not that motivated and need an office, which is completely okay, but being a hiring manager, you need to spot that early on. In addition, mid-level managers need to be a lot more clear with milestones. And when you first get hired, you need to put boundaries like, hey, look, if you miss these guidelines, you're out after 2 weeks. Just make it reality. So that's the management side. Last but not least is retention. Retention, I'm gonna go over a very quick one, and this is the stat of how many emails are sent. People are constantly being poached from companies. I know probably every single person here is being emailed every single day by someone on LinkedIn saying, hey, would you like to interview with this company? Same with millennials. The thing that I'm going to mention is reverse mentoring. What is reverse mentoring and how can it be best leveraged? It's essentially what it sounds like when you pair up a millennial with a more executive person. Now, why is this effective? Persuasion Advisor Solutions found that there's a 96% retention rate over a 3-year period with companies that are actually incorporated this approach. However, though, over 600 companies surveyed, only 56 had mentoring programs and only 13% had reverse mentoring programs. So a very, very small fraction. However, this goes way back in history with Jack Welch. Jack Welch actually had every single executive paired up with someone who was a millennial. Crazy, it goes all the way back. Old news, but people aren't using it that much. Fortunately, companies like Target are hiring smaller tech stars like young millennials to help with their digital marketing strategy because they recognize, look, We got a weakness, a pain point. How can they help? So the benefits, you have a knowledge transfer, increased millennial intention, fresh perspectives. I don't know if any of you know here of Twitch. They're an online streaming company for people who are gaming. Turns out that they have more viewers than the NFL, NHL, any professional sports combined. You probably wouldn't know that if you weren't in the system, but here's the thing. If you had a millennial around who was constantly gaming, you would probably know that and say, oh, I might want to put a job ad out there for all the developers who are actually gaming after work. Diminish stereotypes because you're mixing them together. Now, I covered things super fast. I understand that was like bam, 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 super tactical here and there, but I want to give you a breath, and if something was interesting, you could have wrote it down and can work with it more later. And there's one last thought that I would like to leave you with is that Thomas Pettigrew did a very, very ambitious study. And over 38 countries and 250,000 people and several decades, what he was trying to figure out was, why does us and them develop? Why does one group nationality and another group nationality have animosity towards each other? One of the most key political questions. Not only that, but how to solve it. And he found that the reason why that develops the two different groups is that people have categorization in their mind, a natural disposition to put one group with another. In addition, he found the solution to that long problem that we've been having in history. And you know what it is? Emotional involvement. The Pocahontas story, that one person from one tribe falls in love with another and there's a bond created. But the reason why I even bring this up at all is because I know I threw a lot at you today, but the way that you can actually learn way more than anything in my talk is literally by sitting down with people who are in your company who are millennials or nearby college and just saying, what do you value? What are your career ambitions? Why do you like to do what you do? And by doing so, you'll be breaking that generation gap that's been happening for decade after decade and century after century, so that there will be no more of this generation gap in your workplace, so you have a successful and thriving company. Thank you.